Hi, my name is Terry Jones, and I'm a member of the Seneca Nation of Indians, and we're located about 50 miles south of Niagara Falls. I am a filmmaker, a storyteller. Um, I think what makes my, I haven't, I, you know, it's not until uh, you start to take note of the things that you've done in your life that you've realized. That's what I've come to realize for myself, is that I've kind of lived a full life. Wow. Um, I've always felt different. I made a short film about feeling different. It's called Untitled and Unlabeled. And what it more or less is, it's a short experimental film where I explain through images and text that growing up, I didn't feel I was different. I was told I was different. And and it was not only being told I was different, not only by we used to go to outside school for education. So it wasn't just the white kids that told me, that we were different in terms of how we looked and how we dressed, but it was also the other indigenous kids in my own family would tell me, you think different. And I think one of the things that made me different was that I loved school. I loved learning. And now at the age where I am right now, I've sort of come to realize that I always have this sort of inquisitive connecting the dots on how the world works, and it's sort of like, be careful what you wish for, because the more that sort of like in Wizard of Oz, where you pull back that curtain and you see what's behind. I sort of sometimes wish, I wish I didn't know as much as I wanted to know, because now I can't unknow it. So there's some uncomfortable things, or you start to realize that there's obstacles in life, especially with not especially, but including people of color, sexual orientation, gender identity, that there's just a lot of complexities that go to exist in the dominant culture in terms of who you are. And that film I did with called Untitled Unlabeled. But when I pitched Untitled Unlabeled to my professor at Syracuse University, I said I wanted to do a coming out video. And the professor says, this isn't really about you. This is about younger people who are like you. Because for myself, growing up on the reservation and being a film, wanting to be, realize it, but I wanted to be a filmmaker. But there were no role models for me to try to emulate or try to copy. And so my professor said, this is more about someone who's like you, who may have some benefit on your story. So, like I said, in the video, I say, it's not that I felt different. I was told I was different. And then I explain how I lived my life on the reservation. And then I couldn't wait to leave. And I graduated high school a year early. And I went, and I say I ran for the border. I ran to New York City. And I had all these like great experiences of, working on Wall Street and making tons of money, being, an administrative support to investment bankers. I was able to travel the world, and I lived in the East Village, and I had a great life up to that point. I mean, I still do. But then when I returned, one of the things that in the beginning of the video, where I explained how I was told I was different, I was still different when I came back. And the way that I end the piece is that I say that people are still trying to apply labels that don't apply to me. And one of them is being a father, and one of them is being a husband. And then in the final like clip, it shows a picture of me laying on my bed, just my face. And I said they apply labels that still don't apply, and the word fag comes up. And I know that's a pretty it's a word that's pretty coded and loaded, but it was something that I used to affect. And my last statement in that is, they are afraid to ask and I'm afraid to reveal. And for me, it was more the fact that living with this idea that people have a certain labels people place upon you, there's a certain stereotype that goes with that. And with that film, or with that last statement, was that I wasn't hiding. It was the fact that if someone came up to me and says, well, are you? Well, it doesn't matter to me. You're you. But it was more to me, if people were asking, it was more, or they're afraid to ask, but I think it would be more of a gossip thing, like, oh, have you heard about Terry, this and that. So yeah, so when I made that film, it was the hard part was making it, and it didn't take me long. It took me like 2 days, maybe. Did it for a class assignment, and then I presented it to class, and more or less came out to the class. The class was really receptive to it, and then I just threw it on my hard drive and my Vimeo account, and I just let it sit there. And then in 2017, I submitted it to Imaginative, which is the largest Indigenous film festival in the world. And I had sent it there just to see if they would accept it, and it was accepted. The thing about that film was that it wasn't placed within the LGBTQ programming. It was actually programmed on a Saturday night at 8:30, and it was the first film. There were 3 short films before the main feature, but it was the main feature of it was on the big night in the Imaginative happens in Toronto, and at the Toronto International Film Festival screens. So when I saw the programming, Untitled Unlabeled was going to play in this 400 or 500 seat, auditorium, and I was like, wow, this is pretty intense. And then I ended up seeing a few Indigenous filmmakers and actors and actresses in the audience walking by, and I'm like, holy man, I'm like, they're going to see this very intimate film, so it went from something very internal, and then it went to something that was more public. And after the screening, I went up on stage and I said, I thought the hardest part was making it, which I thought it was, being able to be a storyteller and tell a particular story, to tell a particular story in your own way that satisfies you in the end, that I've revealed enough of myself, I'm not being exploitive, and I'm not adding to the stereotype. So in the end, I'm standing there with a question and answer Q&A, and I had admitted, I said, well, that the hardest part was making it, but then standing there in front of 400 or 500 people and then revealing yourself in an intimate way, I thought at that point in time it was the hardest part. But it was really well received, and actually I have a distributor through my film work in Toronto. It's the Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Center. They ended up representing 5 of my short films that I have. Yeah, so that's my story on being a filmmaker. So one of the things that I'm working on now, of course, I have short film ideas. I want to make my way to grad school, hopefully in the fall of 2022, to get my MFA in film. But I more or less look at myself as a filmmaker. But I was approached by the Micromania Film Festival, which is based out of Buffalo, New York, and Native Spirit Film Festival, which is based out of London. And I'm also a strategic advisor for them. Since the Micromania Film Festival is based out of Buffalo, New York, and they were more or less on Haudenosaunee territory, in particular the Senecas, they wanted to have a film program that was just specifically Indigenous. And specifically Seneca or Haudenosaunee. So they had approached me to see if I would curate it. And I always thought that was kind of like, I'm not an administrator, and I'm not really a curator. I'm more of a filmmaker. But it seemed like a good challenge, so I took it upon myself. But one of the main things that I wanted to champion for was that I don't think people know this, but much of film festivals do not pay screen fees to filmmakers. I'm lucky in some ways that Canada has been really receptive to my work, and a lot of their film festivals do pay screening fees. It's not a lot, you know, it's probably like $50 or $100. But for the most part, you know, the typical film festival does not pay screening fees. And the two film festivals and myself, we kind of said, well, let's try to change that. So why don't we do some fundraising, and why don't we try to, you know, when you curate these films, we'll tell the filmmakers that we're going to pay them a screening fee. And so the film festival is called Micromania, which meant there are short films that are under 5 minutes. So that's like, to me, is like the ultimate, and sometimes it's the ultimate way of telling a story. How can you do it in 5 minutes? Because one, you don't have time to have character development. You don't have time to like story development. It's got to be something that's quick. And then also for me, or what I've learned in filmmaking, is that short films tend to have a little twist at the end, you know, like a unexpected twist. So I started to rack my brain. Since graduating from Syracuse, I think it's now 11. I've had 11 class assignments. They weren't necessarily made to be like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, send these films to film festivals. It was more part of my journey of learning the craft of filmmaking and storytelling. But since I graduated, 11 of my short films have been official selections. I've had over 60 official selections in film festivals throughout the world. So when I started to put this, curate this program, you know, I started to think, okay, where did my films play in these Indigenous film festivals, and which films were less than 5 minutes? And so I came up with a good 5 or 6 films, short films, or micro short films, and then I did a call on my Facebook page, and I got a few other submissions from. So in the end, I ended up curating 12 films made by 14 filmmakers, and it screened at the Birchfield Penny Art Center in Buffalo, New York. So as I said, the main thing for us was to make sure that the filmmakers got a screening fee, but not only that, on top of that, any door ticket sales, anything with a video on demand sales, half of the proceeds for that were going to be divided amongst the filmmakers. So the screening happened on September 4th, 2021. We had a great turnout. We had a really great reception. And in the end, actually, my tribe has 3 casinos, and the CEO of the Seneca Niagara Casino was really, really influenced and was really blown away by the film program. So he's like, we want to bring this to the casino. So right now I'm in the middle of, you know, the curating's already been done. I got permission from all the other filmmakers. And the nice thing was that he really understood that as film sort of being the new art form, the newer art form when it comes to, when you think of traditional Native American art. You know, it's not just beading and carve making and acrostic making and stone carving and all that. There's other, you know, there's video and film. So, you know, they've been really receptive. They're like, whatever, you know, we want to make sure that the filmmakers get paid. We want to make sure you get paid more than what you got paid at the screening at the Birchfield. So it's been a really great experience. And what I'm finding here is that the visibility that I've been able to receive, I've sort of been able to use this moment as a way to champion for, hopefully, I mean, for film festivals in the future, or other film festivals, that maybe to make it to be a norm to pay screening fees to filmmakers. And for us, it wasn't necessarily the dollar amount. And I know myself, being a filmmaker, that when I get a screening fee, it validates myself. It lets me know that I'm valued as an artist, because many times as a filmmaker, they want your work for free, and then they sell tickets and they get funding, but it sometimes doesn't trickle down. I said sometimes it doesn't trickle down, and it's not necessarily to say something was wrong. It's just sort of to say, why don't we present a newer idea? And I hope that my work here is a catalyst for at least the conversation of paying screening fees to filmmakers, especially short filmmakers. So, as I mentioned before, growing up on the reservation, I was lucky in that there were some federal programs that the Seneca Nation Education Department had taken on, and one of them was a enrichment program in the summertime. And one of the first one that I did was a photojournalism class. And what we did was they had a makeshift dark room, and so we ran around the reservation, trying to find stories as cub reporters, like the new bridge that was going on, or the lacrosse team, how the lacrosse team was doing. And then we wrote the articles, and then we took the photographs, and we developed them, and then we assembled them, and it was called the Reservation Times. And there was another summer that they had a video program, and so we took the video camera and we wrote skits, and then we were able to record these programs. They exist somewhere. I know they exist in it might be half-inch format tapes that nobody can play, but I've heard that they're in the archives at the Senate. And but it was really instrumental for me that those programs had created the spark within myself to be interested in image taking. And I had mentioned before that there weren't many role models in my life to say, I want to be a photographer like XYZ. I want to be a filmmaker like XYZ. They didn't exist. And at first I thought it was a curse. I'm like, well, maybe it's not for me. But then once once I got older, and then I ended up going to film school, you sort of realize, I'm like, wow, everybody wants to be a filmmaker. Everybody wants to be an actor. Everybody wants to be an artist. And in the dominant culture, all those paths have already been walked on. And it's a more of a matter of like, how do you make yourself stand out? So as I'm sitting here complaining that I don't have any role models, what I've come to realize is like, well, you know what? I have this open jungle in front of me. I have my own machete. And what I can do is go through and carve my own way out with my unique, I'm not saying unique. When I think of Native storytelling, it's not that we have, as Native people, we have the ultimate way of storytelling. It's not. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and end. For me, it's more of the fact that Native storytelling, and especially when we talk about the dominant culture and how we're surrounded by it, is that they don't really have a good idea of who we are, not only historically, but in contemporary times. So when we talk about love, or we talk about death, or we talk about any sort of the environment or life cycles, our stories are sort of the same. We all want to protect Mother Earth. We all want to take care of our elders. We all want to take care of our youth and plan for the future generation. So we all want to take care of our future, prepare for our future generations. And the way that we're able to use, of course, our storytelling, but it's also what we show and especially what we film. So I say it's more about using different colored paints that the world isn't used to seeing. And many times I say, especially pitching a Native American film or indigenous film is sort of, in America, is sort of like pitching a foreign film, because one, the audience, the dominant culture audience, doesn't know much about us. And then when they watch our content, especially if they know it's indigenous, they already come to the table or come to the screen with their own sets of stereotypes or what they feel that a Native American film would be about. So I'd like to think that they're engaged in the character development and the story development. But I also know that when I'm filming, that they're also looking to see, where do we live, what kind of car do we drive, where do we go to school, those sort of things. And I do the same thing when I watch a foreign film. Of course, I'm reading the subtitles, but at the same time, I'm watching. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that Africa was like that. I didn't know there was a big city in Africa, or India was this way or that way. So for me, it's with the storytelling, like I said, it's using the universal way of storytelling, using my native paint different colored paints that people aren't used to seeing. So hopefully I'm not only educating them, but I'm also entertaining them at the same time. And so so now there's I feel like native cinema or indigenous cinema worldwide is sort of, it's emerging. We're taking control over how we're portrayed, what stories we tell. In some ways, when I'm creating, I did this one film project where it was called Gathered Places, and it was with a film student who was at Syracuse University. He was from India, and I was an American Indian. And the very first day of class, I'm like, well, I'm Terry Jones, I'm an American Indian. And this darker guy across the way looks at me kind of strange. He goes, American Indian. And then when it came to him, he goes, well, I'm Govind. I'm an Indian from India. And then all of a sudden the class had this whole like, it was like the colonist word Indian which has two different contexts, whereas in the same room, and we were conversing, with the class, and everybody was like, wait, India, Indian, American Indian, Indian. So one of the projects that my senior thesis that I did was called Gathered Places, a short documentary where I go to India. Govind comes to the reservation, and so we use the colonizers' language, English, in order to communicate with one another. But as we're having these conversations about what is being civilized, we're sort of leaving the dominant culture lens off to the wayside, and it's sort of like, how do we communicate with one another? And it's sort of like that sort of way of storytelling where we're in control of how we're portrayed. And while I was there, and it pertains to India, but I think it also had pertained to my territory, was that when we were filming, I like to call it culture porn. So I didn't want to include, like, especially on my res, include like, the rotted out trailer or something the dominant culture would deem to be poor, or in India, just sort of like when we're at the Varanasi and the big river, I forget the river's name right now, but there, just sort of like there were certain things that I could do where I could turn the camera, and the camera, a dominant culture person tends to would want to see that, and I didn't. That wasn't the story we were telling. We were telling our story. So so now that there's, as I mentioned before, there's this emergence right now of indigenous filmmakers that I hope that the younger indigenous filmmakers who are out there will have a clearer path of trying to get into the I hate to use the word industry, but of course you got Hollywood, but then you got indie film is more or less in terms of how my imprint would be, how to do storytelling and make films in an independent way. So my advice to them is to reach out, reach out to indigenous other filmmakers. I'm pretty sure they're approachable. I'm approachable. I get messages from my website, and which is tornjerseymedia.com. Sometimes I get messages from the contact information, and either people are doing research or it's younger filmmakers who are asking questions. And my dream gig, like I mentioned before, I think a lot of people sort of feel this way, is like, we never stop learning. We always learn until the day we die. We're always absorbing information and we're processing it. But for me, what I've learned at this age that I'm in right now, or at right now, is when I was younger, and when you're younger, you feel like the whole world and your whole history is open, that it's unlimited, that it's going to last, you're going to live forever. And you sort of don't take advantage, or you don't sort of realize the value of culture and language, indigenous culture and language. And so you sort of just like throw it on the wayside, and you just sort of do your young things. And I'm at an age right now where I'm sort of in the middle, and I like to sort of use the analogy of a relay race. So as I'm at an age right now where that we still have elders who are older than me, who have more knowledge than I do, I'm absorbing from them. I now understand the value of culture and history and language. And so I'm absorbing from them, but at the same time, me being a filmmaker now in the present, I'm passing that baton behind me. I'm hopefully there's younger people behind me who are willing to accept what the knowledge that I have, not just cultural knowledge, but hopefully filmmaker knowledge. And but I know in some time, I'm the one that's going to be the elder. I'm going to be the knowledge keeper. And I just, in terms of for me being a filmmaker, I want to make sure that I do the best that I can do to preserve our stories or tell stories that the future generation would be able to digest, to see who we were at this time, what we were fighting for, whether it's for the environment or fighting for our language or fighting for, taking control over, how we're portrayed in media or so for me, that's sort of where my energies are right now, sort of like understanding what my legacy is. I'm not married. I don't have any kids. I'm not going to have any kids. But I look at my film projects as my children, and I want to make sure they're taken care of when I'm not here, and make sure that they're, that they're being able to be visible and they have the right context. Because I know when I was a younger filmmaker, we didn't have video. I couldn't look at video from 100 years ago of our ancestors. I could only see still pictures, and the text that was there was probably written by somebody from the dominant culture in academia who was observing us, and not necessarily an authentic, true interpretation of our ancestors telling the future something very important. So sometimes when I look at the pictures, I'm like, oh, I wish I could jump into that black and white photo and just ask them some questions. What would they tell me? They would probably say, don't give up the land, don't lose your language. It's just sort of like those sort of things that I think about when I look at a still photograph. So what I want to do right now is I mentioned earlier, I want to get to grad school. I don't want to go through the academia aspect of it in terms of being a tenured professor, but I do feel that after getting my master's, that I would one, first of all, for me, it would be continuing my academic journey. There were so many texts that I read that helped me connect the dots. And whether it was Laura Melvey and the male gaze, where I kind of feel like there's an indigenous gaze out there, or if it's what else is there? Nam June Paik, who was the grandfather of video art. He came from Korea and he came to the dominant culture video program or video world, and sort of turned it on its head. And it's sort of like those sort of things are the things that those are the sort of things that interest me in terms of when it comes to what I want to study more. And also another one was Walter Benjamin, where we talk about art objects having ritual or exhibition value, because I feel like as indigenous people, we really our objects tended to have function more than they had exhibition value. And it's really interesting now to see that we've sort of adopted this way of creating art in a way that's only meant to be used in exhibition or to be aesthetic. And I'm guilty of that as well. I'm not being critical of it at all. Being a filmmaker, it is in some ways for me inauthentic, because I'm not only capturing, I'm only capturing the sight and sound. And I feel like as indigenous, not just indigenous people, but when we talk about human experience, we engage in each other and using our five senses. And when you think about film, I'm only engaging your sight and sound. So in some ways, I can't give you through a video or film the smell in the room or in the setting where the film takes place, the feel of something, whether it's Iroquois white corn or beading or something like that, and tasting. A lot of my films have soup, Iroquois corn soup in it. So usually after I finish I do a film screening. I usually have uh, Iroquois corn soup tasting for the audience, and in the way that way you're engaged not just by your sight and sound, but you're engaged by the five senses. If anybody would like to learn more about my film works, I mentioned earlier my website is Torn Jersey Media, and torn jersey is like a ripped jersey, torn jersey, and that's actually an anagram of my name, which is Terry Jones, which I'm not creative enough to have found the anagram of my name ended up being torn jersey. It's because another famous person called Terry Jones, who was a member of Monty Python, used to play on our public television TV sets growing up in our mobile home on Friday nights. And I used to watch Monty Python, and at the end I used to watch the credits scroll by and I'd see Terry Jones. I'm like, there's my name. And then one weekend or one Friday night I was watching it and all the names were mixed up, and I saw Torn Jersey and I'm like, where's my name? So I wrote it down, Torn Jersey, and I said, it's the letters of my name rearranged. So that's sort of where I came up with the name Torn Jersey Media. And anywhere on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, if you just do a Google search for @cornsoupman, CORNSOUPMAN, I'll pop up. You'll find me. So feel free to reach out to me. I do have some free content, I think, on my website. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me and taking the time to hear my story. And thank you. Yahweh.